about the tools that we offer to kind of provide some ecosystem tools for our traders. We have a hedging calculator on our website that kind of helps you walk through scenario bases on your hedge. We have a newly launched position manager that allows users to track their P&L and submit new bids and offers. And we also do a weekly commentary on the market, which you see here. This update essentially shows metrics around Bitcoin price, around network difficulty, transaction fees, and the spot performance of Hashprice. So, the reason we put out all these tools, we believe, one of our core beliefs is educating the mining community and people that want to trade our derivatives on metrics that are important to their revenue and also provide the instruments that can give them revenue certainty. So we're going to move on next to a different section of the webinar where I'd like to discuss the market fundamentals of Hashprice, which we'll see in the next two slides. What I'd like to kind of accomplish with this is to better understand how fluctuations happen in these derivatives markets. So the first slide we have here is supply and demand and how it pertains to hash rate. Demand for hash rate comes from the blockchain in the form of block rewards, transaction fees, and Bitcoin price. As we mentioned before, the block reward steadily decreases over time, currently sitting at 6.25. And the hot topic is the next halving, which comes in 2024. But going back to my comments on Moore's law, all else being equal, miners can expect the Bitcoin they receive for each hash to decline over time as more hashes are delivered to the network. So while there's a wide variety of variables to consider on the supply side of hash rate, we found that the amount of hash rate that miners are willing to supply to the network is very closely aligned with hash price. So theoretically, all else being equal, miners would be willing to provide more hash rate when hash price goes higher and less when hash price goes lower. When hash price is too cheap, you see machines getting turned off as they become unprofitable. And when this happens, hash rate goes down, difficulty decreases as well. And this in turn has a positive impact on hash price. On the next slide, we're going to talk a bit about the correlation of hash price to Bitcoin price, which obviously Bitcoin price is one of the biggest factors in determining hash price. But we can extract some interesting alpha here when comparing hash price to Bitcoin. There's somewhat of a lead lag relationship of Bitcoin price to hash price, particularly in times of high vol, and which can make for some very strong trading strategies in the products that we offer. And in certain scenarios, hash price derivatives could be used as a hedge or an arbitrage to a Bitcoin position. Also, in high volatility times, Bitcoin price is definitely the most significant factor to hash price, far outweighing difficulty and transaction fees. But in lower volatility periods, such as the one we're in now, the input of difficulty and hash price becomes much more significant. And we'll see that on the next slide. So network difficulty is definitely a very important component to hash price. It's a quantitative measure of the probability of a miner or a mining pool submitting a valid hash with the Bitcoin network's cryptographic hash function. So basically what that means, higher network difficulty indicates a lower probability of a miner submitting a valid hash, meaning it takes more hash rate to solve the cryptographic puzzle. This concept really makes the correlation of difficulty to hash price very interesting. So given that negative difficulty adjustments, in a bear market can have a positive impact on returns if timed properly, hash price derivatives make a very interesting instrument to pair with Bitcoin derivatives. Also, for this reason, when modeling out hash price, forecasting difficulty is a key component in making markets in these products, second only to forecasting Bitcoin price. Difficulty adjustments are typically forecasted using average block times, and you can see that on our website. And these can start as early as block 1, but as you see in this chart, forecasts that are early in the epoch don't really instill much confidence in terms of what the actual difficulty adjustment is going to be. So as we see, is like you get further and further along in the epoch, and roughly around halfway, you can still see you could have a difficulty swing of roughly 8 or plus or minus 8%. However, as the epoch progresses, the forecast accuracy increases. So again, just to reiterate, when modeling forward hash price, it's imperative to be thoughtful about how to model out forward difficulty. And from a market making perspective, developing a robust methodology for forecasting difficulty in conjunction with Bitcoin price can definitely give traders an edge in generating alpha and hash price. So with those two components aside, there's one more component to consider on the next slide. So transaction fees are typically considered the least significant factor in hash price, but they're also the most overlooked. Transaction fees are essentially the fees that are paid by Bitcoin owners when they transfer funds from one address to another. These fees are collected by the miner or mining pool and often represent roughly 1% to 2% of the block reward, although sometimes they can spike much higher than that. Transaction volumes and network congestion are very important factors in hash price. So you could think about it this way: as more transactions are waiting to be processed, Bitcoin users are forced to pay miners more if they wish to have their transactions processed more urgently, and that in turn drives up the percentage of the block reward. So again, when modeling out forward hash price, it's definitely important not to overlook transaction fees, as we occasionally see very large spikes. And there's some very recent examples of this during the Terra Luna crash and the FTX issues as well. On the next slide, since we've covered the components of hash rate or hash price, I want to talk a bit about hash price volatility. So in this chart, you can see a pretty wild chart. It's been an interesting year for different volatility periods in hash price. Given the significance of the events that occurred, I'm going to break it down a bit by quarter. So the beginning of the year was marked by a short period of low volatility, primarily due to a price plummet at the beginning of January in Bitcoin, and then staying in a tight range. However, as we moved into February and March, volatility spiked to highs on the year. And we attribute this spike to Bitcoin's price bouncing up quite a bit throughout February and March, as well as some mixture of positive and negative difficulty adjustments. In Q2, hash price returned to another low volatility environment. There's muted price action from Bitcoin. However, this low volatility environment carried through the first half of May, but again picked up during the Terra Luna events and the aftermath that ensued. Heading into May and through June, we saw a steady climb in volatility and gaining almost 40 points in May alone. And then in Q3, we were still relatively high vol, hovering over 70 at the beginning of July, but it progressively dropped throughout the quarter as price action calmed down and Bitcoin once again stayed in a tight range. Going to the last quarter of the year, hash price volatility was relatively tame. Bitcoin traded in an extremely tight range, but with the collapse of FTX, volatility again picked up as Bitcoin made new lows on the year. Since December, we've seen a pretty significant nosedive in volatility. I think some of this can be attributed to the holiday season and once again a tight range in Bitcoin, but we fully expect, going into Q1 for volatility to pick up in this new year.